On this Tuesday night, a new spike in COVID-19 cases and a new school year.
This week, I think, is a really critical week.
The warnings and the unprecedented stress for students.
If there's too much anxiety, the child's not going to learn.
As one province reimposes some restrictions. Fast-moving fires ripped through California.
It was pretty scary.
The record shattered and the rescues. Deteriorating relations between Beijing and the West.
Such a relief to be home.
The journalists who feared becoming political pawns.
Global National with Dawna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. It is September 8th. That means we've been in this pandemic for 7 months now, and it means fall and winter are approaching. COVID-19 is going nowhere. In some parts of Canada, the virus is now spreading faster than it was over the summer, and that has set off alarm bells. As students head back to school, Canada's top doctor is urging Canadians to get back to public health basics.
Although Canada is striving to maintain a slow burn, the average daily case counts has been increasing in recent days. This is concerning. Now is not the time for complacency.
New infections were reported across Canada today, though the areas of greatest concern are the 4 biggest provinces: British Columbia, Alberta, Ontario, and Quebec. Today, there were 83 new cases in BC, 157 in Alberta, 163 in Quebec, and 185 in Ontario. And in Ontario, officials are so concerned about the uptick in cases, they've paused any further easing of restrictions for 4 weeks. The Health Minister says that means no changes to the size of social circles or public gatherings allowed in Ontario. Today, the Premier pleaded again for people to be responsible and report bad behavior if they see it.
Because it's pretty simple. Just follow the guidelines. Don't have these big parties. Don't have these big family gatherings. It is simple. And I encourage the neighbors, if you hear the big parties, call the police. And I'm asking the police, go in there and lay charges. Very, very simple. We have to start putting the hammer down on people that don't want to follow protocols and guidelines.
The message is play by the rules now, because if you don't, tighter public health restrictions will return. In BC, that's happening now. Provincial Health Officer Dr. Bonnie Henry has ordered all nightclubs and banquet halls to close immediately. Bars and restaurants can no longer serve alcohol after 10 p.m. and they must close by 11.
As we get back to work for many people and back to school for many people, it is the time for all of us to cut back on our social interactions.
There are going to be challenges ahead. We have 2 reports tonight, beginning with Eric Sorensen.
It's a convergence that is worrying public health officials and governments across the country. Just as schools are reopening, COVID-19 case numbers are rising. In Ontario, close to 400 new cases the last 2 days.
On this, the first day of school for many young Ontarians across the province, we need to do everything we can to limit the spread of COVID-19.
But after a spring of near total lockdown and a summer of greater social interaction, now comes a new test. Can children return to classrooms and not create a second wave in the pandemic?
School can be a source of transmission. And I think that our bigger concern also is looking at the colder months, where people are going to tend to huddle indoors, and all of these things can contribute to increased transmission.
Already national numbers are rising, particularly in the West. British Columbia reported an average of fewer than 20 cases per day from mid-May to mid-July. It's risen to an average of about 80 cases a day in late August, early September. The graph shows a similar rise in cases in Alberta. Manitoba saw a recent burst in case numbers. Ontario and Quebec are rising, but not as dramatically as in the West. On the East Coast, case numbers remain low. Nova Scotia, for example, averaged less than 1 case per day for weeks. The overall national pictures, the 3rd week of August, an average of 390 reported cases per day across the country. The following week, 435 cases per day. Into the first week of September, an average of 545 cases daily, a 25% increase over the week before.
This week, I think, is a really critical week, and for sure next week, because then you would have had some idea of what happens when you go back to school. So the next couple of weeks is 2 weeks of careful vigilance.
One big advantage in dealing with COVID-19 now, it's being monitored much more effectively than it was last March.
Because we are looking at the numbers and the trends so closely, we're actually seeing the wave as it's developing. And that way we can do more focused lockdown and focused interventions to try to keep these small fires from becoming a big one.
Young people are less likely to get seriously ill from COVID-19, but it is a massive social and epidemiological experiment, putting children back in schools without putting themselves or other more vulnerable Canadians at risk. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
Nervous, Betty?
Anxiety on the first day of school is normal, but in this new normal, nothing is as it was.
It's a whole nother world in there.
It's been 6 months since students last saw the inside of a classroom. In Pickering, Ontario, the Youngs practiced what to do in lieu of hugging their friends.
Elbow.
And had long talks about staying safe and the importance of masks.
It's going to be hard because I'm going to have to maybe go to the side and do this because I might not be able to breathe, and it's going to be very hard to just wear a mask in school.
But she says she'll do it because we've seen a flurry of cases at schools across the country. After a single positive test, 100 students were sent home from an Edmonton high school. And in Ottawa, 200 staff and students are now in quarantine after possibly being exposed to a number of cases on school buses. While concerning, health officials say neither story is unexpected. A big danger right now, they warn, is overreacting and creating anxiety for our kids.
When we know that students are too anxious, then learning stops. The brain actually starts to reconfigure itself into the fight or flight. If there's too much anxiety, the child's not going to learn. They look very distracted all the time, or they become very drawn in. They freeze. They're very quiet.
Balancing safety and education has never been more complicated. And it all starts with how we drop our kids off at school. Mike Drolet, Global News, Toronto.
An independent review has been ordered into Canada's early pandemic warning system. Employees, including scientists inside the Public Health Agency, told the Globe and Mail their warnings were ignored just months before the pandemic was declared. Mike Couteur has been digging into this. Mike, what have you discovered?
Well, Dawna, not only is there an independent review, but Global News has learned the Auditor General is also asking questions about the Global Public Health Intelligence Network, or GFIN as it's known. Now, Dr. Theresa Tam welcomes the review, but says the system is still working.
I got my email from GFIN, as soon as they noticed something, which was around the December the 31st, January 1st time frame.
That was the date the world woke up to a cluster of cases in Wuhan, China. Health officials in Canada saw reports over a system called the Global Public Health Intelligence Network. Unlike in the past, it didn't come through email as an alert.
Sending out the alerts, as I understand it, were stopped in May of 2019.
Dr. Ronald St. John helped create GFIN more than 20 years ago to help alert Canadian officials to health issues across the globe. Now, he got the same email as Dr. Tam and a number of other messages, but there was no health alert.
If the information just lies there, well, then the subscriber can come in and look and make some decisions, but it's not the same as issuing an emergency alert to all the subscribers that there's something they should pay attention to.
Health Minister Patty Hajdu calls the system critical to identifying and monitoring outbreaks. In a statement, her spokesperson added, "This independent review is an important step in restoring GFIN and ensuring that it can continue its valuable contributions to public health in Canada and around the world."
I think the review will look at what actually happened to those specific alerts as opposed to the regular daily reports.
That's not good enough, according to the Conservative health critic.
A protracted internal investigation with no end date, no potential repercussions, no promise to make this public is completely unacceptable.
A spokesperson for the health minister told Global News they plan to have the review complete and the final report in the hands of the minister within the next 6 months. Dawna?
All right, Mike Couteur in Ottawa, thanks. In Quebec, a number of politicians are in self-isolation after meeting with a mayor who tested positive for COVID-19. Sylvie Perron, mayor of the city of Longueuil, says she began to experience symptoms last Friday after several days of meetings. At least 4 members of the Quebec government, including the transport and justice ministers, plus the mayors of Montreal and Laval, are also in self-isolation now, awaiting test results. Quebec has unveiled a new COVID-19 alert system to help people stay informed. It's a color-coded system. It has 4 levels and is region-specific. Green, the lowest level, calls for vigilance and basic measures like wearing masks. Yellow, level 2, adds inspections and crowd control to enforce physical distancing. Orange is a moderate alert. Higher-risk activities are restricted or prohibited. And red, level 4, is when the risk cannot be sufficiently contained and maximum measures are applied, like a ban on non-essential activities. Right now, 4 regions of Quebec are in the yellow zone. Everywhere else is in the green, the lowest level. And in Ottawa, the new federal Conservative leader has unveiled what he calls a government in waiting. Erin O'Toole has chosen the MPs who will form the party's shadow cabinet. Former leader Andrew Scheer has made the cut. The question is, what will Erin O'Toole offer Canadians in terms of leadership and policies that is different from Scheer and that will get the Conservatives elected in the next federal election? Speculation about a possible fall election is still flying around Ottawa. Mercedes Stephenson, our Ottawa bureau chief, is with me. Mercedes, start with Erin O'Toole's team and his strategy.
Well, Dawna, as you know in anything, but especially in politics, having the right people in the right places is so important for the Conservatives as they try to give themselves a pre-election makeover, hoping to make themselves more appealing to voters. You mentioned that former leader Andrew Scheer managed to stay on. He got a pretty high-profile portfolio that will be key in the pandemic recovery, and that's infrastructure. That will also see him facing off against Catherine McKenna. A couple of other key names on the list that our viewers will likely recognize. Pierre Poilievre stays on as the finance critic. He's been a strong voice for the opposition, leading the charge on the WE controversy. Michelle Rempel-Garner also in there. She'd been shut out by the Scheer camp. She's back now, resurging into the high-profile health portfolio, which obviously will be very important during this pandemic. And Erin O'Toole himself takes on the role of middle-class prosperity, which sends you a signal. Now, Conservative sources say the new leader is already trying to plot out a very different tone and vision for the Conservative Party, one that they hope will make it hard for the Liberals to pigeonhole them as going into austerity during a pandemic. O'Toole is already pushing a new message, one focused on helping labor and holding big corporations accountable, a very different sort of message than we heard from the Conservative Party before, and a sign that they are preparing to broaden the tent, as the polls say they must do to win, especially in Ontario.
Mercedes, I think only the Bloc Québécois said they want a fall election. I think that's right. So why are people still talking about it as a possibility?
Well, that's a great question, Dawna, because it almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy at some point, and that is the concern of some of us who cover politics here in Ottawa. But while we only have the Bloc Québécois saying they definitely want one, you're seeing a lot of people hedging bets. The government has to really balance here, finding opportunity without seeming opportunist for some of the more drastic changes that they're wanting to make. Take a listen to this.
You're not wanting to be seen as trying to use this for a great political experiment, but as a time to perhaps introduce something that is actually going to improve the lives of Canadians. Canadians aren't going to have a lot of patience.
Sometimes the devil is in the details, and while the NDP is likely to support the government on some of those big ticket programs, Dawna, the question will be how they're implemented, as NDP strategist Carl Bélanger told us today.
The key will be how to implement those things and when and how fast and with how much money. And those are the details that often, bring down governments, because if words are not followed by action, you are in for some trouble.
And Dawna, we'll see if there'll be a choice between two solitudes here in the potential coming election for Canadians. As we continue to talk about it, still no end in sight for that speculation. Dawna?
Okay, well, I long for the speculation to end. But anyway, thanks, Mercedes. Appreciate that. Wildfires are burning on the West Coast, and a poor air quality advisory is in effect for parts of BC choked by smoke from fires in Washington state. On Vancouver Island, thick smoke is blanketing the southern tip, including the city of Victoria. Residents are being asked to avoid strenuous activities outdoors. The same goes for people in the southern interior of BC. This is what Osoyoos looked like yesterday, and this is what it looks like today. In California, 25 major wildfires are burning. More than 800,000 hectares have burned, a new record, and there are still 4 months to go in the fire season. Today, the National Guard rescued at least 150 people from the Sierra National Forest. More helicopters have been sent to save others trapped by the huge Creek Fire. In New York State, the police chief and other high-ranking officials in Rochester say they're retiring. They've come under scrutiny after the death of Daniel Prude, an African-American man. He died in March, days after being pinned to the ground by officers. Police Chief Laron Singletary resigned today after 6 days of protests. Back in March, Daniel Prude, who was naked and unarmed, stopped breathing after being placed in a spit hood and pinned to the pavement for 2 minutes. He died 7 days later. At the time, police claimed he'd suffered a drug overdose. The death sparked outrage last week when relatives released body cam video showing how the arrest took place. The medical examiner has ruled his death a homicide. A 5-day diplomatic dust-up. Coming up, the Western reporters caught in the middle and relieved to be out of China. Two Australian reporters are back on home soil tonight after a tense 5-day diplomatic standoff in China. The men were questioned by Chinese police about the detention of another Australian journalist who is now being held in Beijing on national security grounds. The story is familiar to Canadians. The two Michaels, Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor, still languish in a Chinese jail, facing similar charges. All of it a low point in relations between China and the West, as Redmond Shannon reports.
Journalist Mike Smith back in Australia and clearly relieved.
Did you feel threatened at all when you were over there?
A little bit, yes. It was a complicated experience.
Smith and Bill Birtles had been the last two Australian journalists in China working for Australian media outlets. And then last week, Australian officials advised them to leave as soon as possible. But before they could do so,
they knock on the door to say, we are from the Beijing Department of the National Security Bureau, and we're here to tell you that you are involved in a case.
The Chinese officials wanted to speak to the men about the news anchor Chung Lei. She's an Australian citizen who was working in Beijing for a state-controlled television network, but was detained last month on national security grounds.
We're kind of odd people to interview or interrogate if it was really just about that case. So it sort of felt to me like the whole episode was about harassment.
Both men went to their nearest Australian consulates. Chinese officials interviewed them there before allowing them to fly home. The detention of Lei bears some similarities with the arrests of Canadians Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor almost 2 years ago. Their cases ramped up tensions between China and the West, following Canada's detention of Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou at the request of American authorities. Then there was the decision by Australia and then by others to ban Huawei from being part of 5G mobile networks, although Canada has yet to do so explicitly. Additionally, Australia angered Beijing by pushing for an international investigation into the origin of COVID-19. The Beijing spokesman said Tuesday, as long as foreign journalists abide by the law, there is no need to worry. Global Affairs Canada says it doesn't keep track of the number of Canadian journalists working for Canadian media outlets in China, but says it advises a high degree of caution due to arbitrary enforcement of local laws. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
Confessing to atrocities still ahead, two men who say they're soldiers speak out. A stunning development in the pursuit of justice for the victims of killings in Myanmar and attempts to eradicate Rohingya Muslims. Two men believed to be deserters from Myanmar's army have admitted in a video confession to taking part in what Canada and other countries call genocide. The video has not been released to the public, but these are images from it. Two men who say they were soldiers, confessing to being involved in horrific acts of violence against Myanmar's Rohingya Muslim minority. The video has been analyzed by Fortify Rights, a human rights organization. It says the men confessed to taking part in atrocities and, based on their detailed accounts, has determined they were directly involved in the deaths of more than 180 men, women, and children, as well as other crimes, including rape.
They also name 6 senior commanders who were giving orders. And those orders were, according to their testimony, orders to commit genocide. They were being ordered to, quote unquote, exterminate all Rohingya.
Global News cannot verify their claims, but Fortify Rights says the details align with other accounts of survivors who fled to Bangladesh by the hundreds of thousands 3 years ago. Bob Rae, who served as Canada's special envoy to Myanmar before becoming ambassador to the UN, says there will be consequences for the two men, and their confessions could be crucial in linking the atrocities to Myanmar's military strategy.
We are involved in a very painstaking, brick by brick, step by step effort to get the people who are responsible into court. But the reality is there's nowhere to hide.
There are two cases against Myanmar, one at the International Criminal Court and another at the International Court of Justice. Last week, Canada joined the Netherlands in signaling its intent to intervene in the second case. Justice won't be quick, and the persecution of the Rohingya continues.
And there are upwards of 600,000 still in Rakhine State. They are denied the right to freedom of movement. They're essentially living in an open-air prison, an apartheid system.
Smith is hopeful a former soldier's admissions will help push cases against Myanmar forward.
It is a massive crack in Myanmar's armor of impunity.
Fortify Rights says the two men have been taken into protective custody in The Hague, where they could be tried by the International Criminal Court. An ICC spokesperson would not confirm that to Global News or any other details, citing confidentiality and the fact the case is ongoing. Up next, a new helmet could be handy for health workers. Necessity is the mother of invention, and some students in Vietnam have come up with a prototype of a helmet to protect frontline workers from COVID-19. The designers say it will bring some small comforts to those who have to wear protective gear for hours. It has an air purifying respirator, a built-in glove to let you scratch your nose. There's even a compartment to store snacks. The students are already working with a company to get it mass-produced. And that is Global National for this Tuesday. I'm Dawna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is Hamilton Township, Ontario. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.